He sits under a willow tree, crosses his legs, looks around, and, for the first time in years, for no obvious reason, he suddenly recalls with extreme clarity a story his mother once told his sister, back when she was 6 years old. His sister, not his mother, and she got caught stealing makeup from a pharmacy. "There was once a little girl who was so naughty," his mother began, "that they chopped her head off and threw it into the flames of the sun." "What happened to her body?" his sister had asked. "They buried it deep in the middle of the moon," his mother had said. He cannot now, no matter how clearly he brings all the other details of the day to his mind, figure out what his mother meant to achieve with this story. Don't be naughty or you will be murdered. Yes, this was the moral of all their childhood stories, but why the moon and the sun, he thinks to himself, why the body and the head? He thinks about all the strange, superstitious habits his mother brought him and his sister up with. When you see a blackbird in winter, for example, you must salute it and say, "I agree with you, Mr. Blackbird." When you see someone with their mouth open, you simply must wedge your hand into their mouth and say, "A closed mouth opens the heart." When you see someone squatting, you, no matter the circumstances, must push them over, or try to, at least, and say, "He who would squat would attain righteousness not." He buries his hands in his pockets and listens to the sound of a train as a shadow passes over the snow, turning it blue. He looks at the buildings which are still lit by the sun and thinks about how his mother would, from time to time, spontaneously begin panicking at the sight of equal numbered sets of things, 3 trees beside 3 men, for instance. Or 2 signposts beside 2 men. He sits under the willow tree and watches the sun come out again, as the sound of 3 Americans, one of whom wears a red hat, mingles with the sound of the passing train. He wonders whether he should start wearing hats. The problem, as he sees it, he only really owns hooded tops and coats, and a hooded top or a coat with a hat, he thinks? That looks ridiculous on a man. It would look ridiculous on him at any rate, he thinks. He reflects, though, on just how reassuring it can be to have something over your head from time to time, whether it's a hat or a hood or a tree or all of these things, especially during the cold for practical reasons, but also because of how much of a burden it can be, he thinks, to have nothing between you and the sky but a bit of hair. He understands why so many religions make such a big deal about covering or uncovering the head. Not enough people take this point seriously enough, he thinks. There being nothing between your head and, well, everything. Why, he thinks, aren't people more afraid of ending up there? Anything could happen to you up there, he thinks to himself. It's not a safe place for a person up there. He laughs off this thought and, returning to himself sitting there under the willow tree, starts thinking about his commute tomorrow. Does it make sense to change at Bornholmerstrasse, where it takes him longer but there are fewer changes, or at Wedding, where it takes him no time at all but he barely gets any time to sit on the train and read? He asks himself whether he has anything to read at the moment, and he doesn't, it is true, but he would like to watch sunlight touching the pages of a book. You are a visual person, he thinks to himself, reciting something he was often told as a child by teachers and other grown-ups. Although this is true, he thinks to himself, he is, indeed, a very visual person, in so much as life, to him, consists in looking at things. He isn't, he must add to himself, someone like his sister who has a good eye for things. He has always vaguely believed that he has a medical problem with his eyes, that they let in too much light or something, and that he sees too much with them. He brought it up with an optician once, but he was told his eyes were perfect. Why then do so many things seem so big, he asks. His mother would sometimes become very afraid of his eyes, and would tell him, "Sweetheart, please stop looking at me for one moment. Look at that person walking past, please, sweetheart." He wonders whether this problem with his eyes is one of the reasons he always sees so much more chaos than other people, one of the reasons why the world seems so disorganized to him and so complicated, with so many unnecessary mechanisms all vying with one another in these knots. His friends would often ask him, "Why are you looking at that tissue? Why are you looking at that chair? Why are you looking at that dental floss? Why are you looking at that other tissue? Why are you looking at the shadow of that iron? Why are you looking at that receipt and that pencil and that button? Why are you looking at that tissue?" He never had an answer. Whenever he tried to imagine the world through other people's eyes, he imagined himself looking through a dark tunnel. He remembers another of his mother's sayings: "To the man who cannot see, that is bright which appears dark to the men in possession of sight," or something like that. He wonders again about the hat. Maybe he should get a hat, a red hat, he thinks. Yes, he makes up his mind to buy a red hat as soon as the charity shops are open again and he sees a nice red hat in a charity shop. Or maybe a yellow hat. Just something, he thinks. Something. Something to put a shadow between him and all of that up there. He thinks about walking by the river to get here earlier and seeing that completely unexpected dancing couple. He remembers his mother trying to teach him and his sister the Viennese waltz years and years ago now. Her shrill voice yelling, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. He wishes his mother was still alive, so he could gather a few more normal, sweet memories of her and not be left with all these weird memories. The kind of memories you have about a living person rather than a dead person, he thinks, to keep mulling over for the rest of his life. He remembers his disappointment on seeing that the dancers were performing for a videographer and not just dancing for the joy of it. He remembers how, over the course of the next few minutes as he continued to watch them, these dancers, his attention was slowly drawn away from them and their dance and towards the quiet beauty of those slabs of ice being dragged along by the river, a spectacle which gradually became horrifying in an almost sweet and inoffensive way, as he felt himself falling deeper and deeper into the sky it reflected. He remembers how he became infected at that moment with his mother's numerological terror as he realized 2 women were walking away from him, 2 women were walking towards him, that there were 2 dancers and 2 observers of it all, the videographer and himself, all falling into terrible alignment. He is snapped out of this uncomfortable feeling by a snowball. As he speaks to his sister's boyfriend, here to pay back some money he borrowed a week ago, he ceases to think about anything and feels the grid of his head wind down.